Real Madrid this evening. They head into the second leg of their Champions League playoff, 3-2 down to the holders. Despite the deficit, Guardiola believes they're more than capable of progressing to the final 16.
It's good to have you with us here on Pienaar and Friends, an hour of good conversation in very good company, which tonight is the former Labour strategist Matt Lavender. Hello, Matt.
Hello.
Good to see you here. And the Deputy Editor of ConservativeHome, Henry Hill, is here too. Hello, Henry.
Hello.
I'm going to ask you first then, Matt, the way I do each evening, your thought for the day. It doesn't have to be about Ukraine.
Yeah, it feels a bit strange talking about anything other than Ukraine and Donald Trump's Truth Social posts. But one of the things I was thinking about is reading some of the stuff on British politics at the moment. There's a bit of rumours around about things like reshuffles and that. And my main thought is, you know, having been in the political lobby and then worked in politics for a little bit, is that I hope we don't descend back into that too much and too quickly. Because at the moment, there is so much serious stuff going on, as there always is, but it really feels that it's particularly pronounced at the moment.
You think a reshuffle of ministers around Keir Starmer's cabinet would look a little bit, I don't know, off the points, a bit trivial.
I think so. I think there's a reshuffle's not going to happen. You know, my bitter experience of Keir Starmer reshuffles, which in my case actually led to me losing my job, they don't tend to happen anywhere close to when they start being rumoured. And I think that we get a lot of this kind of Westminster rumour and gossip and stuff. And there's obviously some incredibly serious geopolitical issues going on at the moment. And I hope we can stay on the substance of them, but I wouldn't necessarily hold out huge amounts of hope.
Oh, well, it's a thought. What about you, Henry? What's your thought for the day?
I mean, I asked the producer what the rules for this were, and they were like, "What's been lodged in your head?" And honestly, it's just been the Simon Hart diaries.
Right. We haven't talked about that today. What are we talking about here?
Well. I mean, the one today about the person who got stuck in a brothel, I suppose, would be the big sort of headline one.
Conservative backbencher who wrote to the chief whip Simon Hart,
saying that they were stuck in a room with 12 naked ladies and a CCTV camera.
Yeah, the way you do.
And I think, because you read the political diaries, the good ones are always some of those standout historical documents of any era from sort of Chips Channon on. But I suppose it's a bit different now that I'm reading about periods which I was covering as a journalist rather than as a kind of very political student or whatever. And thinking back to all the times that you read these developments, the public side of these developments happen, and you have to put on your serious face and be like, well, I think the implications of this for taxes are, and then you just get to see the other side of the curtain and see what was actually going on behind there, and it's sort of slightly humbling, I suppose.
Yeah, this the political diary of Simon Hart, the former chief whip, Conservative chief whip, under a couple of Conservative prime ministers. It's been described as the juiciest thing around. I mean, I haven't seen it myself. Does it live up to the billing, Henry?
Yeah, so far, absolutely. And crucially, it seems as if he wrote it at the time. It's not one of those weird, I took notes and I'm now writing it as a diary-style book after the fact. Matt Hancock's one, which amazingly had him on New Year's Day in 2020, spotting a small story about a disease in China and thinking that's probably important, which he probably wouldn't have written in a contemporaneous diary.
You're nodding.
Yeah, I've actually only seen 3 of the extracts, just flicking through social media, and every single one made me just sort of gawp, and you can't believe it. I think what's also extraordinary about these is that there's a good chance that some of the people mentioned, or not mentioned in these stories, but that they refer to, are probably still in Parliament or still walking around Parliament with their passes, and those sort of things just make you, it certainly does draw back the curtain to what goes on in Westminster.
Okay, well, guys, we're going to talk now about Ukraine and what's been going on today, because an awful lot has been going on. Just as we were coming on air, literally as I was sitting down in the studio, ready to talk about Donald Trump and the way that he had some hours before echoed Vladimir Putin's talking points, his lines to take, his arguments on Ukraine. Donald Trump actually saying that it was Ukraine and not Russia who started the war in Ukraine. There was plenty to talk about there. But as I was sitting down, this dropped. You can see it here in my hand. It's the posting on social media of Donald Trump. Let me just give you a flavour of it for those who might not have heard this earlier on. So Donald Trump in the posting, well, first of all, he describes the president of Ukraine as a modestly successful comedian. Now that seems pretty dismissive. It's an absolute compliment compared to what follows, because he then Donald Trump accuses Zelensky of refusing to have elections. Well, he's not refusing to have elections. He can't have elections. There's a war on its martial law in Ukraine. He says Zelensky is very low in the polls. He's not very low in the polls. He's at about 57%, according to the latest numbers that have come in. He then goes on a bit later on in the post by saying that Vladimir Zelensky probably wants to keep the gravy train going. In other words, that he wants to prolong the war and not end it for his own purposes and his own gain. It is absolutely startling stuff. Now, I put this at the start of our show earlier to Catherine Philp, the World Affairs editor at the time. She gave me her analysis.
Is there anything in there that's true? Let me have a look. Playing like a fiddle, I think, is the other way round. I think that what Donald Trump's posted just now on Truth Social suggests that he's been played like a fiddle by the Russian side, because every statistic and comment that I can see in this post is one that we've heard before from the Russian side. I mean, these figures, clearly the Russians have told him, conveyed to him, this will probably be during that phone call with Putin last week, that the US has been somehow exploited and has paid $200 billion more than Europe, and a total of 350. Well, that's not true. For starters, Europe's paid more. The figures are nothing like that. The problem is he's been speaking to a dictator who does have elections, has fake elections to keep himself in power, and that's Vladimir Putin. But I think the only thing that he said possibly that could be true is that this is a conflict that has seen more people killed than any other since the end of the World War II. But it's not millions. And I think we're seeing the gloves come off in this relationship.
And that was the caustic verdict on President Trump's social media posting from Catherine Philp, the World Affairs editor at the Times. I also spoke to a former Prime Minister of Poland, Jan Krzysztof Bielecki, who had this to say.
That was a little bit too much, I have to admit. I try to understand better the negotiating tactics of Donald Trump, but in this situation, I think he went simply too far and should be met with a very clear and straightforward answer from everybody, not only from countries of Eastern Europe.
Right. And what is your answer? What is your clear, straightforward answer to Donald Trump now?
But this is nonsense, and really we cannot build on wrong understanding of facts and the history of relation between Russia and Ukraine, at least over the last 11 years, since first invasion in 2014.
Just have a listen to this. The German ambassador to London, who spoke to me a short while ago.
First of all, it's important not to react to every comment Donald Trump makes. But at the same time, I mean, we all know that these are Russian speaking points. Putin tried to delegitimize President Zelensky because of the fact that elections in a situation of war could not be held. So I think we need to keep a cool head on all of that, but also make clear that we don't share this assessment.
So that, of course, was the ambassador, the German ambassador to London, talking to me earlier on. I want to get the thoughts of you guys, Matt and Henry, in just a second. We've got so much to talk about, and I want to hear what you're thinking. Listening to this, send me your thoughts in a text or a tweet. We've got lots of them here already. I mean, can't have too many of these. I'm so interested to see what you make of all of this. You're listening to Pienaar and Friends here on Times Radio.
Carol Walker on Times Radio.
And Henry Hill from ConservativeHome and Matt Lavender, former Labour advisor, here with me on Pienaar and Friends. Your thoughts on the developing story of Ukraine and Donald Trump's thoughts on that are coming in at quite a lip. This is in from Bob, who says this: Trump is right. Enough killing, enough expense, time for compromise and peace. Now, many of your other thoughts coming into the studio here are, it's fair to say, not so complimentary of Donald Trump. They are pure acid. Sue writes in, Zelensky really does live up to cometh the hour, cometh the man. He has the most to lose, his life, but he has still challenged Trump's preposterous claims, unlike the rest of the world's cowardly leaders, including our own PM. Keep them coming. Want to hear what you are thinking. 87222, start with the word Times. Tweet to @Times Radio. Henry and Matt, however you read what Donald Trump said yesterday, and I suppose backed up by him today, he has changed sides in the argument on the for and on the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and that's a very significant moment, Henry.
Yeah, it's remarkable because America has always had this isolationist tendency. I think sometimes we forget how unusual the 20th century really was, and actually how long it took America to get involved in both of those big conflicts. And it's also been fairly mercenary. You know, you'd think the fight against Nazi Germany was the existential struggle of that century, and yet America did lend-lease, right? It asked us to pay it back for every penny that we gave it. But he goes so much beyond that kind of attitude, which is perhaps what I was expecting. Yeah. Because he's there actively denigrating the Ukrainian government, and he's claiming that Ukraine started the war. And it's hard to even conceive. You know, sometimes somebody says something that's wrong, but you can at least see what they think. Yeah. It's hard to see how he could possibly think that Ukraine started the war. Look where it's being fought, right? It's all Russian troops in Ukrainian territory, with the exception of Kursk, which was 2 years after the war started. Look at 2014. It was Russian troops that went into Crimea, which was a Ukrainian territory, and so on. And so it's really extraordinary. Because what I was expecting was that we would get, there needs to be a negotiated settlement. Frankly, the West has not given Ukraine enough support to actually win against Russia over these past few years. And it's now, the conscription age you can see in Ukraine is going up and up and up. I expected that kind of cold mercantilist sort of approach. I did not expect, maybe, optimist, did not expect this.
It's not just a preposterous suggestion, as you say, Henry, and Matt, for the president to say that Ukraine started the war. It is word for word the sort of thing, not that we would hear, but we have heard it again and again out of the mouth of Vladimir Putin and out of the mouth of spokesmen in the Kremlin, out of the mouth of tame media, out of Moscow. Why? How can this be justified? Sometimes it's argued, Matt, isn't it, that we're looking at a president who does deal making his own unique way. The Art of the Deal, the book that's cited so often. Aim high and just see where you get. Stick to a tough demand, see where you get. But even in that context, what sense does this make?
None, as far as I can see. I mean, I think if you were going to do a deal, you wouldn't necessarily just go in and give one side absolutely everything that they want, but it seemingly is exactly what Donald Trump's doing. I mean, I think yesterday there was an argument, a bit like Henry alludes to, that you could sort of give Trump the benefit of the doubt because there's a way that you can say that it's time to end this war. But what he said today goes so far beyond the pale because this is no longer being expressed in a kind of US interest. We're spending too much money, too much resource, we're never going to win this war. It's not in our national interest. Now, I don't personally think it would be in US national interest just to pull out, but that's a perfectly reasonable position for a US president to take. It's another thing entirely to go beyond, as has been said, and to denigrate the Ukrainian president and to just literally parrot lines that are coming not just out of the Kremlin, but out of the kind of darkest recesses of social media. And in terms of the sort of deal-making art, as you describe it, I think there's he often seems to have this theory of sort of chaos, keep everyone guessing, keep all the pieces moving. He's doing that to the Ukrainians, first and foremost. He's doing it to his European allies. No one knows what he's doing. He doesn't really seem to be doing it to Vladimir Putin. He actually seems to be remarkably consistent in the message being delivered to Vladimir Putin. Whether it's taking peacekeeping forces off the table, Ukrainian NATO membership off the table, saying we'll lift Russian sanctions, all of these things, there's actually no chaos there, which makes the only person who really knows what's going on, it seems, is Vladimir Putin, which is an utterly extraordinary situation.
Well, the president isn't just not laying down counter demands to Vladimir Putin. He's not laying down any demands to Vladimir Putin. And look at the way this is being received in Moscow. We've seen plenty of reports about the way this is being well, the president's words are being repeated with a certain amount of glee by very senior people in the Kremlin, including the foreign minister. The Russian media are taking it and just trumpeting it as an affirmation of Vladimir Putin and Russia's position. Hard to see that is remotely helpful in anything particular way. Henry, he's strengthening Russia's arm here.
Yeah, I suppose if I had to, and obviously I'm speculating because nobody can truly know the mind of Donald Trump, if I had to sort of steel man what he's doing, Russia is maybe, if what Trump wants to do is get a peace on the current border, and by the current border I mean the war front, not the legal border, and pull out. Russia is maybe already there. Putin enormously raised the stakes on that when he formally annexed all of the occupied territory and made it part of the Russian Federation. But if he's prepared to freeze the conflict along the current lines, Ukraine is not. Ukraine has said that it will only really accept a status quo ante peace on territorial terms, and therefore Trump's like, right, who do I need to put all of the pressure on? It's the Ukrainians. I still think that's a morally contemptible strategy, but if I had to try and work out if there is any reason other than him just thinking that Putin is right, he might be doing this, it would be Zelensky is refusing to take part in the negotiations, and so he is trying to just maximize the pressure on the Ukrainians to give up what is, even on the current line, a fifth of their national territory. Right, like 20% of all of Ukraine is currently under Russian occupation, and they would have to give that up in order to get a peace on the current terms.
So in other words, make it crystal clear to anyone that if Ukraine chooses to reject whatever deal they come up with, they're going to be on their own. They will not count on America. America is simply not on their side. Is that the essence of what you're saying?
Yeah, I think so.
But even to if that's the plan, you don't have to say the sort of things that he's saying. You could just simply say that. You could get your defense secretary to say, look, we've taken a judgment here. We're going to do our best to get the deal for you. And if you don't, that's your free choice. You could say it like that. He's gone so far beyond that.
You can say that about everything that Donald Trump does. I don't think there's a single thing that Donald Trump has ever done where there hasn't been. You could have three people like us in a room going, but you could have just said the thing, Donald. Like, you could have just said the thing you actually wanted. Like, and it may be that he's just an impressionable person and Putin was the last person he was in the room in, right? That's also possible. But in terms of what the negotiating strategy is, I think that Ukraine is refusing to take part in the talks. He wants this deal to work. He likes the idea of himself as a deal maker.
Yes, for sure.
And so he's worked out, right, who do I need to squeeze?
Well, I'll play devil's advocate myself and come at it from a slightly different angle. Let's just imagine for a second that what Donald Trump is trying to do here is take a position so outrageous to European ears, let alone Ukrainian ears, that Europe feels that we've just got to hang together here. We've got no choice against this onslaught of pro-Putin positioning. We've just got to stick together in our own interests as well as in the interests of Ukraine. No other course. Let's just talk about how we do that. You could try to rationalize it that way. But again, I sort of get back to the point, you don't have to do it like this. You don't have to strengthen Russia's arm and give sort of affirmation to the position they've been taking for so very, very long, and create sort of resentments and a lack of trust, and a serious lack of trust in what has been in Britain and Europe's principal ally, richest and most powerful ally. Trust in America under the administration. I don't know how on earth you repair that.
I mean, probably a change of presidency, if that, right? Because if this represents the future of the Republican Party wins elections in the United States, and it wins them quite a lot. And I do think that we need to be ready for a 21st century that looks a lot more like the 19th in terms of America's attitudes towards the rest of the world. And frankly, and this is on Europe, we didn't take the prospect of Trump winning again seriously. We didn't take the prospect of him living up to his rhetoric seriously. We have not invested remotely to the level that we need to in defence. And now you've got this sort of position where Sir Keir Starmer is saying, I'll put British peacekeepers on the ground in Ukraine if there is a peace settlement, which does imply that, he's relying on Trump's deal. But then you've got Germany and Poland saying that they won't deploy troops to Ukraine. So this is on us, to be honest. We just assumed America would always be there. They would spend 4% of GDP on defence. We would be able to pay our armies down to nothing and then lecture the Americans on how much better our welfare spending was. And it was a very comfortable deal for a long time, and it is over.
I mean, this is in from Will, our listener, Will Morris. He says, Well, Will takes the view. It's obvious, he says, there's something in this deal for Trump. If he's being quiet about his demands from Putin, it's because he doesn't want us to know them. I suspect America, says Will, or even, God forbid, Trump himself, will benefit hugely from mineral rights or land rights or some other form of accrual when a deal emerges. So I suppose, is that cynicism? Some would call that cynicism. But I mean, that sort of attitude is going to be encouraged.
Well, America's asked for 50% of Ukraine's mineral rights.
He suspects that Donald Trump may gain himself personally. But again, I don't think he'll be the only one with that sort of a notion.
Yeah, I mean, who's to know? I mean, we can't possibly know. But like you say, Henry, it's perfectly possible that he could not have taken this position and still managed to have secured from Ukraine a huge amount. What I don't quite understand is how and why this is in the US's own interest. You know, if we take the America First policy sort of at face value, I don't quite see how America benefits from this. And there is I think a huge part of what Donald Trump is trying to do is about trying to literally scare European leaders into taking their own defence more seriously, boosting their defence spending and taking more responsibility for defence on the continent. But I don't see how essentially sort of colonising Ukraine and splitting it between the US and Russia helps to achieve that aim.
Right, let's take a few minutes before the news now, just to look ahead to, is it later on this week when the Prime Minister heads to Washington? It's in this in the next few days, at any rate. So, Henry and Matt, off he goes into the Donald's den. It is an opportunity. It is a challenge. It is also a risk, Henry.
Yeah, well, I mean, for first off, if you're seen to be getting too close to Donald Trump or to be getting on too well with him, the British press will have a go at you, which is what happened to Theresa May. But I mean, of all the people, and I don't think this is to Starmer's discredit, but of all the people to try and get inside the mind of the Donald and persuade, schmooze him, I don't think Sir Keir Starmer would be the person. It is extraordinarily difficult because, of course, Britain has always positioned itself as kind of like the bridge, right?
Yeah.
We are a part of Europe, but we're also an English-speaking country with very strong links to America. When the two fall out, we kind of mediated. I don't think that's really possible at this point.
Well, is there such a person?
Well, I mean,
in British politics,
I don't think so currently. Certainly not at the top level. But Starmer is maybe as much not that person as it's possible to conceive.
Right, oh dear.
But I don't think that's to his discredit at all. I think it's just he's a very sort of down the line public servant lawyer. I think that the idea of him being able to turn on the snake oil charm and seduce Donald Trump is just slightly be interesting to watch.
I was saying earlier on, I spoke to the German ambassador, who was expressing the hope that Keir Starmer could function as a bridge between America and Europe, putting some hopes in that. I mean, and again, what a contrast from past years. Well, I recall so many European summits where it was about Germany ganging up with France against Britain most of the time. But either way, it was a competition to see who was going to be the preeminent leader. And now you've got a German ambassador saying, "Look, rah rah, on you go, Keir Starmer. See what you can accomplish." What are you thinking about all this, Matt?
I'm not sure I entirely agree that Keir Starmer's the wrong person to do it. I think the point is right that I'm not sure there's anyone who can do it. But I think Keir Starmer's greatest asset in some ways is also his greatest weakness, which is his pragmatism. He is unideological, and this has caused him all manner of problems in the Labour Party. But actually, I think the fact that he is so pragmatic, it may be to his benefit now. I think he will happily take the brickbats from Donald Trump. I don't think he will rise to the bait if in any press conference or anything like that. I think he will keep his eyes sort of focused on the bigger picture.
Yes.
I think he will be happy to play second fiddle, and he won't sort of take that personally.
I don't think he'll have much choice about that.
No, but a lot of leaders don't like that. A lot of people who become Prime Minister don't instinctively like that. Whereas I think Keir Starmer will be happy to do that because I think he recognises the role he has to play.
Is there a happy medium there? Is it not, when you deal with President Trump, you either stand up to President Trump or he walks all over you? Aren't they the choices?
Quite possibly, yes. So there may be no good cards to play for Keir Starmer. I do think one of the things that's interesting in terms of, we don't know what's going to happen next week, and by the end of next week, my optimism may seem very...
this time tomorrow, who knows?
Maybe very naive. But I think that so far, I honestly think he's played a pretty good job. And I think the fact that the next week's meeting is a genuinely important moment for the world and for European security. And we haven't had that as a UK Prime Minister going to the White House. Occasionally, it's been very important from a UK perspective. We're sort of going with a begging bowl. But this is the first meeting in for as long as I can remember, where it genuinely matters for the security of the world. That means that Keir Starmer has done something, even if it's just in Europe, to elevate himself into this position of being a bridge. Now, whether he can do it or not, we don't know. I'm not sure anyone can do it, but I think he's given himself the best chance that anyone could in these circumstances.
Why do you argue, I'm not saying necessarily you're wrong, but why do you argue that he's played his cards well so far?
because we're in a position where he is going to the White House and he's seen by Europe as a genuine bridge. Now, whether he can actually achieve that and actually get anything out of Donald Trump is the big known unknown. It is possible that no one could, and there is simply no way to do that because Donald Trump is who he is. But I think the fact that this meeting actually is going to be a position where Britain is going to go on behalf of Europe, make an argument, and, you know, we're talking about European leaders getting on the phone or even coming to Britain in the immediate aftermath for Keir Starmer to give them a readout and work out what happens next. Now, that means that he has managed to position Britain post-Brexit as this bridge between the two. Whether he can use that position to achieve anything substantive is, you know, we don't yet know.
Yeah.
But the fact that I would anyone disagree that this meeting is genuinely important, and more so than any UK Prime Minister trip to the White House has been for a long time?
No, that's fair, isn't it, Henry?
Yeah, I think that's fair. The question was just about whether the extent to which, you know, maybe you're right. I know obviously I'm less familiar with him than you, but, you know, Britain sort of structurally has that position to an extent anyway, not disputing that maybe Starmer's played his hand well. But I think the other challenge is, you know, one of the reasons that Britain has some credibility on this is just because we have stepped up on Ukraine, right? And we always have. Starmer's just signed that $3 billion a year deal. We've given them most of our functional military equipment, although no one from the IOD will quite say that in public, and all the rest of it. But the challenge is that, of course, when the Labour, when they came in, they scrapped the Tory 20 billion over 5-year defence spending boost, and there's currently a big row in the government about where they can find any money for defence. So if Donald Trump is saying, look, we're tired of America having to pick up the bill for European security, I think it would have been really helpful if at least Starmer could say, look, here is my, you know, black and white on ink dry plan for getting British defence spending where it needs to be.
There's quite a lot of wrangling inside Whitehall in the MOD between departments before we get to that point.
Yeah, and it would be exactly. But of course, they had something like it at the beginning of the Parliament. It wouldn't have been enough strategically, but it was more than they now
Pictures
have got
changed
committed.
since then, as you know.
Yeah, exactly.
I do wonder, I have no intelligence to suggest this, but I do wonder if we might hear something on defence spending in the next couple of days, maybe over the weekend, in advance of the Washington meeting, only because is it going to be an untenable position for Keir Starmer to go to the White House and when Donald Trump says you need to spend more on defence, he goes, well, actually, Rachel Reeves is conducting a spending review that will report back in June. It may not be possible. I wouldn't be amazed if we saw some sort of interview from the Prime Minister over the weekend where he says it's going to happen. Now,
do you know what? I think I would be amazed if that happened, because if the Prime Minister is in a position to say we're going to raise defence spending to 2.5% of GDP by such and such a date, or even more, because the suggestion is that that's not enough, I think you save that for the podium. I think you save that for the podium in the White House, because I mean that is where you make a very big bang to the media, to the president, to Europe, and everywhere else.
Maybe so, but I still think. Sorry, Henry. I was just saying, I think it will happen before when we were expecting it to happen, which is the strategic defence review or the spending review in June. I think we might see it much before then.
You whetted our appetite with that. Look, we've got more to talk about here on Pienaar and Friends, and there's time to do it. Do stay with us, and time still to share your views. Send me a text, a tweet, send me a voice note. 0333 003 2353. We can hear what you think in your own voice, and we'll talk about it after the news here on Pienaar and Friends with Stuart Willie. A show from 7 o'clock. Hello, Kate.
Hiya, John. Look, this continues, doesn't it? I think it's fair to say. Towards the end of my show last night, we started to hear from Donald Trump. His early lines completely replaced by his attack on Volodymyr Zelensky, accusing him of starting the war in Ukraine. And the fallout continues today, as you've been saying. That latest post from Donald Trump on Truth Social, calling Volodymyr Zelensky again a dictator. We've just heard from the German leader, for now anyway. Germany's Chancellor Olaf Scholz, one of the first European leaders, I think, to comment on what Donald Trump's had to say. We've not heard anything from Keir Starmer, only from Kemi Badenoch, ironically, on this from the UK side. Simply wrong and dangerous to deny President Zelensky his democratic legitimacy, says Olaf Scholz. And all that against the backdrop of a couple of things happening in Europe. And that's sort of what I'm watching on, really, is what kind of response are we going to see from Europe? We know that President Macron has held a video meeting today with leaders of Baltic states and other countries who weren't involved in that Paris summit on Monday. So I'm hoping to get a few lines from that. All the while, our Defence Secretary, John Healey, has, of course, been with his Danish counterpart looking at troops. And Denmark today has committed an extra £5.5 billion to defence spending. That takes them over 3% of GDP.
Right.
That is in quite some contrast to the toing and froing, the stuttering around that we're doing here in the UK, because we have no money to contribute to defence, and we're not working, some would argue, quick enough to find it, all the while our European allies are stepping up. So I'm going to be watching across all of that this evening. We're going on the ground to Ukraine to find out what Ukrainians think. We'll be speaking to a former Republican senator who has some choice words for Donald Trump, and we'll be speaking to a Ukrainian MP for Zelensky's party, Marianne Zabolotsky, as well, to find out her reaction to what Donald Trump has had to say about Volodymyr Zelensky. So there's loads on that. A bit more besides. We'll talk about energy costs and a couple of stories from tomorrow's paper involving welfare spend. We'll go to Brazil as well for the latest on that missing journalist.
All right, good stuff coming up with you, Kate, after 7 o'clock. Now, here on Pienaar and Friends, let's just pick up the threads of what's been going on today, because, I mean, goodness me, what has been going on today, it's difficult to keep pace with all of this. That Truth Social posting from the president, just as we were coming on air earlier on, that's after his earlier comments about Ukraine starting the war. Then we got that Truth posting saying that Volodymyr Zelensky was a dictator without elections, suggesting that he was seeking to prolong the war, to keep the gravy train, as Donald Trump described it, going. We can get an American perspective now from the always welcome Molly Ball from the Wall Street Journal, who I think is on the line. Molly, hello.
I'm here. Hi.
Molly,
hi.
hi.
John, how you doing?
Really, really good, Molly. I'm so keen to hear what you make of what's been going on, and still is going on pretty much as I speak. After that Donald Trump Truth Social posting, there's a certain amount of ding-dong going on where you are in the States, isn't there? I'm looking at a posting from Mike Pence, Donald Trump's vice president in his first administration, coming in on the side of Zelensky. He says Ukraine did not start this war. He said Russia launched an unprovoked and brutal invasion, claiming hundreds of thousands of lives. The road to peace must be built on the truth. That from Mike Pence. And Molly, you've probably seen the reply, have you, from J.D. Vance to Volodymyr Zelensky, warning him not to, I'm quoting now, badmouth Donald Trump in public. And here's a quote. The idea Zelensky is going to change the president's mind by bad-mouthing him in public media. Everyone knows the president will tell you this is an atrocious way to deal with this administration. What can you say, Molly? I mean, it's quite extraordinary, this stuff.
It is. I mean, we have a phrase for this kind of thing when dealing with Donald Trump, which is shocked but not surprised, right? I mean, If you covered the campaign as I did, you would have heard him say not nice things about Zelensky many times. And that's why it was the fear of many in Washington, including many traditional Republicans like Mike Pence, that upon taking office, one of Trump's first moves would be to sell out the Ukrainians to the Russians. We all saw in his first term how positively he seemed to regard Putin, standing on stage with him in Helsinki and saying that he believed Putin's word over that of the U.S. intelligence community. Now, people around Trump would always point out that his actual policies on Russia were quite tough, and that's true. I think the question is, beyond the rhetoric, what is he actually aiming to accomplish here with regard to the conflict in Ukraine? Because if he is seeking to merely give Ukraine to Russia, obviously there's going to be a lot of people who really do not want that outcome. Some around Trump will tell you that, in fact, as he is doing, with the Washington bureaucracy, as he is doing with the Middle East, his aim is simply to jolt people out of their complacency and to raise a new possibility. And this is sort of what Boris Johnson also said earlier today. But the thing with Trump is that you never know, and whether that's a strategy or not, everyone just sort of has to roll with it.
Yeah, I mean, J.D. Vance, the Vice President's statement, Molly, it argues this. It says what Donald Trump had to say was not, I'm quoting, not based on Russian disinformation. It's based on the fact Donald Trump, I think he says, knows a lot more about geopolitics and has a very strong view and has had a strong view for a very long time. He then says that President Zelensky was getting very bad advice about how to deal with the Trump administration. And taking aboard, Molly, all that you are saying, some of us here, a lot of us here, are just struggling to rationalise the tone and the content of what it was that the president's been saying overnight and through the day, calling Zelensky a dictator, and then quoting just provably false numbers about America's contribution to the war effort in Ukraine, $350 billion, simply not true, and accusing Zelensky of refusing to have elections, simply not true. Even saying that Zelensky was very low in the polls when he's the exact opposite. It was suggested early on this may be about spite, personal spite, and maybe that makes a certain amount of sense.
Yeah, it's clear that the president is angry and was angered by what President Zelensky said about him. And Vance appears to be basically substantiating that idea that when you say nasty things about Donald Trump, it has always been the case, whether you are a rival political candidate or just a random person or the president of another sovereign country, he will always intend to hit back twice as hard at anyone he feels has insulted him.
Yes.
And so that's what he has done in this case. But, the idea that Trump would say things that are not true, that are provably untrue, that would post on social media things that are not true and continue to repeat them and to believe them. These are all familiar dynamics from the first Trump administration and indeed from his entire time in public life.
Indeed. And Molly, Henry Hill from ConservativeHome is here with me. So is Matt Lavender, a former Labour Party advisor. All keen, I think, to pick your brain. Henry.
Yeah. Hi. I suppose the question is from a country that's obviously having to live with the frightening prospect of a world in which America might be turning away from its 20th century conception of its international obligations. Some of this is obviously Donald Trump, his particularly extraordinary brand of conduct. But how much of this actually represents a kind of structural, probably permanent shift in at least Republican thinking with regards to America's commitments in Europe and around the world? Because whilst I'm sure most Republicans would not go around saying that Zelensky is a dictator and that he started the war, there does seem to be quite a lot of them who are tired of, as they see it, America funding British European defence.
Yes. Molly.
Yes, no, that's a brilliant question, and you've really put your finger on the important dynamic here, which is that Trump has shifted the operating ethos of the Republican Party toward a more isolationist stance, but he has not shifted the whole party. And we saw this play out with the debate about 1 year ago over American aid to Ukraine. There was a quite active debate in the U.S. Senate, and the senator who was the most vocal advocate for not sending more American funds or weapons to Ukraine was J.D. Vance. So he represents one pole in this debate, but as you may remember, he was not in the majority in that particular vote, and most Republican senators ended up eventually, after a long and tortured process, ended up voting to send that money. But this is an active debate within the Republican Party. The remnants of the old sort of Reaganite school that does want to maintain traditional American alliances, there are still quite a lot of them, particularly in the older generation of Republicans.
Yes.
I think the question is, do they have the stomach to take on Trump and try to and is it even possible to sort of bend him in a different direction,
yes.
Given that his so-called America First platform is something he's quite invested in and does have, as Van said, quite clear and consistent and long-standing views on. I think it's unlikely that he's going to be dissuaded from this particular stance of his. And we saw during his first term that this idea that you described so eloquently of turning away from America's traditional international commitments, that was something that he did for 4 years in his first term as well. There were elements of the more traditional conservatism within his administration that tried to blunt some of that. And so the idea of this Trump administration is maybe you didn't hear us the first time, maybe you didn't believe us the first time, but this time we are serious and we are going to do the things that the president wants to do.
Okay. Matt Lavender.
Yeah, hi Molly. You mentioned about the campaign and the fact that Donald Trump said sort of lots of sort of derogatory and unpleasant things about Volodymyr Zelensky during the campaign. But as far as I'm aware, and obviously you know much better than me, it never went quite this far in terms of sort of literally parroting lines straight out of the Kremlin. And so I just wondered on that basis, what you think has changed and actually led to the situation that we're in now? Is it to do with something personal that's gone on between him and Zelensky? Is there an American sort of domestic element that's driven that? I just wondered if indeed you think, having followed the campaign, you think it has hardened, and if so, why that would have happened.
Well, we have seen Republican resistance to aid for Ukraine increasing over the course of the time that this war has been underway. And you're right that Trump's statements on this have been somewhat mixed, but he is the driver of this increasing movement of the Republican Party, and particularly the Republican base. Many of the most pro-Trump elements of the Congress, people like Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, have been out front of saying that they believe that what America First means is you don't send money to foreign countries, you spend that on the needs of American citizens at home, and that means not sending funding to the Ukrainians. This particular outburst, as you say, appears to have been prompted, the insult itself appears to have been prompted by the president feeling insulted by Zelensky. But overall, he has, obviously given a lot of thought to this conflict and how he wants to resolve it. And I think a lot of people in Washington are not too surprised that he has, to some degree, taken Putin's side in this conflict.
Molly, I'm just looking at some statements here from senators, United States senators in Congress. Now, Lisa Murkowski, for example, who I know has been critical of Donald Trump in the past, she takes him on here and says, I would certainly never refer to President Zelensky as a dictator. She was talking to CNN there. We've got Senator Tom Tillis. The invasion, he says, was the responsibility of one human being on the face of the planet, Vladimir Putin. And Tillis says a dictator is not a word I would use. And here's Mike Rounds, Senator Mike Rounds, pointing out Zelensky is the duly elected president of Ukraine, thereby not a dictator, saying he's been a key component in the fact they've been able to withstand the Russian attacks. You mentioned earlier on that the Republican Party has reformed itself around the image of Donald Trump. There are some people in Congress who do pipe up occasionally against him. Do you hear, even privately, Molly, from others who are maybe losing patience with the direction the president has set when it comes to relations with Western allies and all of the other things where he defies, past norms? Are these people there? Are they anywhere close to standing up against their leader and president?
That is the million-dollar question when it comes to Trump is, are there any Republicans who will dare to take him on, given that they know that they will get a lot of negative feedback for doing so, possibly from the president himself and certainly from his supporters, up to and including physical threats against themselves and their families? So they have to calibrate very carefully whether it is worth it in any particular circumstance to criticize the president, knowing that those are the likely consequences. And the consequences also could mean the end of their political careers if the president decides to go after them, in a primary. So the question is whether, first of all, whether any Republicans will take on the president, and then second of all, whether enough of them will to actually change the policy, because it tends to be a few sort of moderate voices like Lisa Murkowski, or someone like Mitch McConnell, who is the former leader of the Senate Republicans, but is notably not their leader anymore, in part because of his divergence from Trump on issues like these. He represents that sort of older, more Reaganite generation of Republicans. But the new generation of Republicans, the younger members of the Senate, most of the members of the House who tend to serve shorter tenures and come from more partisan districts, they are fully on board with Trump. And I think we can expect them to back him in almost anything that he decides to do.
Right, Molly, always a pleasure, and really good to get your thoughts at any given time. I'm guessing we're going to be on the phone to you before too very long. Molly Ball there from the Wall Street Journal. Now we've got more to talk about in the time that's left to us here on Pienaar and Friends. I want to look at, well, how is what we're hearing and talking about today, how does that bear on British politics, including British party politics? Boris Johnson has been piping up today. We'll be sharing with you what he has had to say on social media too, and getting the thoughts of Henry Hill and Matt Lavender, and your own thoughts on this. Send me a text, send me a tweet. Let's keep on talking here on Pienaar and Friends at 6:50 on Times Radio.
Times Radio Market Watch.
Henry Hill here with me on Pienaar and Friends, the editor of ConservativeHome, and Matt Lavender, former Labour advisor. I want to talk just for a bit about this situation going on with Donald Trump stirring it up, to put it ultra mildly. What does it mean for British party politics? This has just come in to get us started on this. The former Conservative shadow cabinet member James Cleverly has called on David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary in Keir Starmer's government, to respond to Donald Trump's attacks on Volodymyr Zelensky. Cleverly said Trump was wrong about Ukraine and Zelensky, and the Foreign Secretary, he said, should say so. His silence is deafening, he said, rubbing in that message. And he says the UK and the US must send the message, we don't let tyrants win. Henry Hill.
I mean, on the one hand, this is obviously the kind of thing you say in opposition, and in an ideal world, it would be nice to have that. But on the other hand, for the reasons we were discussing earlier, if you're the one European country that has a chance to get in the room with Donald Trump, and you've seen, and we've just been told by an American journalist, how Donald Trump responds to criticism, the thing you obviously don't do is send your foreign secretary out to call Donald Trump names a few days before that meeting takes place. One of the unfortunate things about, is that diplomacy still exists. And even in the social media world, where everyone wants an immediate reaction to everything and lots of things are quite performative, you still actually have to take diplomatic decisions.
Yes, although there was no sign whatever of David Lammy stepping out or being sent out by Keir Starmer to take on, as it were, Donald Trump before the meeting with Trump, between Keir Starmer and Trump in the White House, was even discussed.
Well, but that's how he got the meeting, right? I mean, diplomacy is a long-term thing. You have to cultivate Trump or any leader over a long period of time, right? And that does mean that you, unfortunately, have to go entire news cycles without insulting the villain of the minute. Yeah. And it is unfortunate for the politicians involved. But, I hold no particular candle for this Labour government or this Foreign Secretary in particular. But I don't think he can be fairly criticised for not sabotaging Sir Keir Starmer's meeting.
So James cleverly, maybe having his cake and eat it, because you don't hear the Conservative front bench of Kemi Badenoch coming out, jaws snapping at this moment, but he's got a certain freedom to do that.
Yeah, I think Badenoch has come out today and sort of pushed back against what the president.
She's come out, and I've got her message in front of me. She comes out and says, she does say President Zelensky is not a dictator. He's the democratically elected leader of Ukraine who bravely stood up to Putin's illegal invasion. She does say that, but it's not exactly guns blazing, is it? And then she goes on to say Donald Trump's right. Europe needs to pull its weight. Look, fair enough point to make, and that includes the UK. Then turns on Labour and says the PM, well, we'll have my support to increase defence spending. That's a fully funded plan to get 2.5% sitting on his desk. It should be at the bare minimum. He should get on with it, says Kemi Badenoch. Get a plane to Washington, show some leadership. So look, full backing for more to be spent on defence. The Conservative front bench have been saying that for a while, but the means of paying for that, I mean, what sort of consensus is there going to be when that comes out?
Yeah, so it's one relatively rare thing you can actually give the last Conservative government on this is that it actually did bequeath Labour a fully funded plan to increase defence spending by about 20 billion in real terms. Grant Shapps obviously said it was 70 billion, but it was about 20 billion, and Labour did scrap that when they came in. And I think that beyond the who said what on social media and all the rest of it and the horse race, the biggest structural impact of this on British politics is going to be that we're suddenly in a world where you do have to find 2.5% of GDP, 3% of GDP for defence, which we have not done for a very long time. And where is that going to happen? Because we can't really borrow more. With taxes at record levels, that's going to involve cuts. Yeah. And that is going to be an incredibly interesting and very painful period of British politics.
Well, I mean, cuts are difficult. Then you're talking about tax increases. And, I mean, is there going to be any kind of party consensus if that's where Rachel Reeves wants to go? Not that she's going to want to go there. It's the last thing in the world she wants to do.
No, austerity is going to come back. Rachel Reeves has, people would say it never really left, and there's been a whole debate about whether Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer saying we're not going back to austerity is really plausible or not. But the one thing that we can be sure about from this week is that austerity will have to return to public services under this Labour government. And they, whether they try to continue to spin in that it's not or not is sort of by the by. That's absolutely going to happen. I mean, I think just going back to the point that was being made about diplomacy, these things are incredibly delicate. I think it's almost quite surprising that I appreciate he's in opposition now, but James Cleverly was Foreign Secretary not that long ago, and you would think that he would sort of appreciate that actually David Lammy coming out and slagging off the US president tonight is neither in the Europe's interest, Ukraine's interest, or in the UK's national interest, because there are these huge questions that need to be worked out. How to spend more on defence, how that is going to tally with other promises that have been made, how they're going to go about this meeting with Donald Trump in a matter of days. And these are really complicated questions where there is no clear and simple answer. But I think that absolutely, Rachel Reeves is going to be watching what's going on with a certain amount of trepidation, because as if her hands weren't tied enough, going into the spring statement and then the spending review, it's even more unpalatable suite of choices for her.
Right. Last word on Boris Johnson, who has put on X, on Twitter a little bit earlier on, a question. When are we Europeans, he says, going to stop being scandalised about Donald Trump and start helping him end the war? And he goes on. Now, this is before Donald Trump's Truth Social outburst. But no, Boris Johnson, his position is not easy, is it?
Well, no, this is the peril of, on the one hand, the way that you maneuver Donald Trump to the extent that that's possible is that you butter up his ego. On the other hand, he might then do something insane and make you look like a fool, which has happened here.
Yeah, and that's exactly the problem that Keir Starmer's got. I was saying earlier that I think he's played it pretty well so far. In 7 days' time, he might look very, very different. I mean, he is the most unpredictable possible person to deal with, and I wouldn't envy Keir Starmer's position right now.
No. Okay, well, that meeting's coming up in the next few days. Keir Starmer in the White House with Donald Trump. That's a few days away, and I think we know between now and then an awful lot can and very probably will happen. However, we are out of time. Henry Hill, Matt Lavender, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for listening. Our producers were Angus Mitchell and Sophia Johansson, and Judy Ham. Ori Cole was at the keyboards in the studio, and Isaac Marley was pressing the buttons. I'm back at 4. Kate Borsey's next.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio, the voice of the Times.
Thanks, John. Have a great night. It's 7 o'clock. This is Kate Borsey and the evening edition coming up.
These are Russian speaking points. Putin tried to delegitimize President Zelensky because of the fact that elections in a situation of war could not be held.
Donald Trump says Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is a dictator who played Biden like a fiddle. We'll dig into that with a Ukrainian MP and a former Republican senator. Plus, French President Emmanuel Macron holds a second emergency summit this afternoon. We'll have the latest. And given all that, is it time to bring back conscription? That's our debate tonight. First, though, the latest news with Stuart Willey.
Kate, thank you. Good evening. The war of words between the US and Ukrainian presidents has escalated, with the White House saying Donald Trump's social media post was a direct response to comments by Volodymyr Zelensky. In a scathing post on social media, Trump called him a dictator without elections who'd done a terrible job. Earlier, President Zelensky said the White House is trapped in a disinformation space. Molly Ball is a senior political correspondent at The Wall Street Journal.
The president